Hi, this is Adam Asnes, and thank you for joining us on this webinar. We have a couple of guests here. I want to mention that one of the, sorry, thought I silenced that. I want to mention that one of the most ongoing issues that we see across enterprises and companies of all shapes and sizes are the localization department trying to be heard by the development teams who are just trying to put out product as fast as they can. They're under all kinds of requirements to get things going. And so that can be a challenge for localization teams, to be heard, to feel like they're heard, from design to deployment to ongoing maintenance and support. As well as the marketing messages and all that. But it's special for developers, we've found. Of course, that's where we kind of stay as a company. But where we go from here is learning from the people that are really doing it on a large scale. So I have as a couple of guests here that I want you to all meet. First of all, I'm just going to start with Milen, and then we'll get to Loy in a second. But Milen has been in the business for a long time. Am I allowed to say that? Anyway, I know Milen from when I first got into the industry, even before Lingoport. Lingoport's in business since 2001. Milen was leading all kinds of internationalization efforts for some real trailblazer organizations in this industry. If you go way back to the days of ILE, and maybe even a little before that, these were the early sort of bad old days of localization, when people were just first learning about internationalization, and Unicode was still like something being started. People were using Shift-JIS for some encoding for Japan. It was tough. There was for a lot of companies, there was the English version and separate localized versions that were quite independent, and code forking and all that. Anyway, so she's seen it all, kind of thing. She runs services at Lingoport, so very happy to have her here and taking the burden off of me on this webinar as well. Now, next is Loy. Loy Searle and I also know each other a long time. We met while Loy was at JD Edwards. Actually, I don't know your life before that, but
yeah, I know. It all began right there.
Yeah, okay. JD Edwards was, you know, like everybody should know a little bit about JD Edwards because they were doing things so far ahead of the industry in terms of capturing content and reusing it, and advanced systems that were really pretty unique to their business. So it was really, you know, Loy got into this advanced mode very, very quickly. And it was also a development-driven organization. So she's been solving these problems of working with developers a long time. So you can see we have a little bit of a bio there. She's been at, you know, ran little localization groups at little enterprises like Google and Intuit and Deluxe. So she's really, she's been a superstar. She's also been the previous president and board member at Women in Localization. So many of you may know her through that. And always a total pro. So with that, I'm going to let Milen take over. Hopefully I've thoroughly embarrassed both of you. And
you have, thanks, Adam.
And I'm going to turn off my screen and let you continue. All right.
Great. I think, Kate, this is where you would be sending the questions to our audience. The poll is open. I see.
This gives us a, you know, understanding of who is here, and we'll share the results. Oh, it's lighting up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, we have a mistypo here. So the first one is localization. So just for you to know that if you're in localization role, just hit the first one. Sorry for this.
All right. We're going to give it up. Poll closed. If you missed it, you missed it. All right. We've got a few developers here. That's great. 19% other. Love to know what the other is. That's kind of interesting. Okay, good, good. I always, I'm always a bit of a troublemaker on these things. I always enter my title as janitor, which is not entirely untrue. All right, you take it away, Mylène.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you, Loy, for joining us today.
Milan, I'm sorry, we have a second one,
Oh,
a second
okay,
question. Sorry, it's launched right now, so people are responding. Sorry.
okay.
Wow, this is great to see the numbers getting high at the cooperation side of the scale. I can tell you that we used to run these surveys independently, and the numbers were quite flipped in terms of this. So this is great. This tells me that people are attending because they're doing well, but they always are looking to learn more. That's how I interpret this. So back to you, Mylène.
All right, great. Can you all see my first
Yeah,
question? Very
you're
good.
good.
Before I ask the question, I will thank Loy once again to be sharing this webinar with me. And my role will be actually quite easy because I'll be asking Loy questions and she will be answering them based on her experience. Loy and I have crossed paths at least a couple of times in the past in different companies we worked, but she's been doing quite a lot of new things at Workday. And I would like to find out with my first question, if you can tell us about what your team is doing at Workday and what their mission is.
Sure, happy to. So I started at Workday almost 3 years ago. It's gone by really, really fast. Started during the COVID period of time. So in fact, just this week, starting to meet some people that I've not met yet on my team. So what my team is really responsible for is localization and globalization at Workday. And what we do is we really support the global company in their journey to grow their revenue, sell products, support our global customers. So I see us as very much a support engine for our global growth. That's really what our focus is. When I started about 3 years ago, we were very well established in the way that we worked in at the time with our existing platform being part of our core product and a little bit of marketing support. And what we've been doing since then is really building out a center of excellence.
Sorry,
Oops, we got the poll back.
yeah, sorry, that was my fault. I thought I would email
That's
everybody.
okay. I thought maybe something had changed.
Yeah,
So,
sorry.
so we've been building out a center of excellence, which means we're the volume of work that we've taken on, the number of stakeholders that we work with, the number of product teams we engage with, has all kind of been on steroids for the last few years because we're on a mission to really grow globally. So my team, I would say, is one of the strong supports of our global growth and development.
Awesome. Well, that's actually great because it leads easily to my next question. You did mention that you're working on supporting more volume, more stakeholders, and you're building the center of excellence. Would you say that's one of your successes? Or like, what are some of the successes in these past 3 years you feel you have achieved with your team?
Sure. I would say the first successes that I think we built early on were establishing tiering. We did not have language tiers when I started, and getting funding to catch up our primary tier 1 markets So at this point in time, we are completely caught up with all of our tier 1 products. So we're actually waiting on some of them, which is a really lovely position to be in, to not have that kind of a backlog behind you. We still have a lot to do. We have tier 2, tier 3 markets that we're working on. And we also have a lot of content that we're still working on, and just a handful of outlier products that are still getting themselves internationalized and getting their strings into resource bundles so they can work with us. But we really worked through, I would say, a pretty huge backlog of product engagement, especially to get caught up. And that was an all-out team effort across the board. There's maybe one other area that I'm particularly proud of, and that is when we started, we did not have an internationalization practice. We didn't have standards. We didn't have training. We didn't have any place you could go to find out what you should do to properly internationalize the product. And we have a gentleman that runs this program for us who's deeply passionate about I-18N. And he's trained well over 1,000 people at this point in time on the engineering side. We're part of all the new hire training for new engineers. So when you come in and you start, you get that internationalization training from him. We also are training designers and have trained writers on writing for a global audience and designing for a global audience. But I have to say that probably one of the coolest things we've done is really establish an internationalization practice. And then underneath that, we are big fans of Globalizer, and we rolled out Globalizer this last year, and we're in the process of pretty much getting that into every one of our product teams' way of working. So I would say internationalization from scratch and being where we are today feels pretty good.
Okay. Yeah, that's quite an achievement, because it's one thing to, have the trainings and have someone within your organization that, knows internationalization and wants to train others to do it right, not only developers, but you mentioned authors and designers. But on the other hand, it's the challenge is also getting these other parts of your organization pay attention to what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
So this question here is actually about how do you get, the question was about development teams, but beyond that, you've mentioned authors and designers as well. How do you get them to pay attention to what your team is trying to do and have them, be part of it? Do you need to encourage them, or how do you roll this out basically?
So maybe I will start with, this is the part of our job where we push a rope all day long, right? This is always effortful, I would say, to get engineering teams to be mindful and pay attention to what we know they should do. What we have done, there are a few things we've done that I think have worked really well for us. First of all, we've started with the teams, like we hooked up Globalizer initially and started our internationalization training. And we have a Slack channel for questions and things like that. So we kind of are building a little bit of a community there. But we started the work with the product teams that wanted to go global, the product teams that wanted to work with us, that needed their products translated. And we just basically put this right in front of them and said, to do that, you have to do these things first. And so every new product team came through the door with this expectation. These are the things you have to do. This is how far along the journey you must get in order to work with us, so that we'll translate your products and engage with your repositories and, pick up your strings and drop them back when we're done and test the products and all of that goodness. So starting with the teams that were hungry and really wanted to work with us was a great place to begin, because we built kind of, I would say, energy and a shared passion and interest in doing the right thing with those groups. And we really built our communication mechanisms with them as well. So the Slack channels, they became kind of an extension of us in how they shared with other engineering teams what they were doing. So if someone was first and then they knew another team was coming, they'd be like, yeah, this is the Slack channel and this is the team, go talk to them. So that helped us get going. I have to say, I think our hardest part is really to come, because we've spent the last really 2+ years bringing on all of the new product areas. That was a lot of repositories, a lot of different product areas, bespoke, standalone, acquisition products. And now we're starting to look at what I would consider to be our core product, the product that's been mature and it's been out there for years. And that is a little bit of a different journey, because those are the teams that feel like the work was done years ago, right? Aren't we done? But they don't know. They don't know what they haven't done properly or what's still missing. So we're starting to pull all of their repository information together. And what we've done initially for this core work that's years old and not just brand new. So these are the teams that think they're already there, is we've started working super closely with the QA organization. So we're working with them on their testing protocols and on their testing approach, so they can help catch these things as they are testing and work through that with their development teams. And then my job really begins working across the leadership, across the engineering teams when we hit walls and we hit barriers from there. But the product's not in bad shape for a product that never had that I-18N testing integrated within it. But we still have work to do, and it's always harder with mature teams. Much easier with new teams. Get those guys early and let them impress everybody else, and then use them to shame their peers. Encourage them to join you as well.
Yes, that seems to be typically the case, that it's easier with a new team than a team that's well established and, as you said, thought they were done.
Mm-hmm.
And this collaboration between QA and developers and having them work together so that they know maybe what's missing and they can fix it makes a lot of sense, of course. You mentioned that you have also brought in Globalizer. And Globalizer, of course, can also find some issues as well. Is that also part of the bugs that QA, or developers basically see? I mean, there are things that QA has, but there is also scans from Globalizer. Or do you use Globalizer only with the new products?
No, we're using Globalizer now. We've pretty much done an analysis that I think we'll be done with by in the next quarter or so, that will include all of our repositories. And it's taken a lot of time for us to get across all of the repositories, but we're pretty close to that. And so we work with Globalizer and the dashboards for both the engineering teams, especially for the engineering teams that are first engaging with us. And there's a lot of work to kind of, prioritize the issues that need to be solved first. And then we're also using it for our engagement with our QA teams as well. So it's both. The dashboards are out there for both teams, and we're partnering heavily with QA for mature products. We're partnering heavily with engineering for less mature, newer products. So it has a lot to do, I'd say, with life cycle of the product itself.
Great. All right. You mentioned the word prioritization. So when you plan a global release date for a product, some areas obviously will be prioritized over others.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, if you can tell us about, do you break this into phases? What kind of methodology you use? You've mentioned different teams already, like QA and devs and localization teams. And you've mentioned also some tools, but if you can maybe, tell us about when you look at a product and you have now many products to look at, you're probably asked about when will this be done? How do we plan our release dates? So how do you go about that?
Sure. So I would say I would break this into a couple parts. For our existing products and the mature deliverables that we have, they have established release cycles, and it's our job to really support them. So we will, we pretty much have automated our drops and our pickups from the product teams directly to their repos, and we adjust to their schedule. So that's how we work in a normal manner with mature products, where we're caught up and we're already translating what they do, and we're already engaged with those teams. That's the easy thing. And we have lots of different release cycles, from weekly to every couple weeks to quarterly. So the release cycles can really vary wildly across the different product areas. For new products, it's every new product is a new story. So for us, the new products are usually the big ones, the ones that require the most effort are typically the acquisitions. These are products that we acquired, and they were, they may have been in various stages of going global to have never started going global. So we've kind of seen this spectrum. And if they're starting from scratch, the new products, we typically will work with them on prioritizing what is really customer-facing UI. So customer-facing UI and externalizing the work that they do into resource bundles, and then working through the I-18N list of things they need to fix as we go. And then as they progress, then we're typically testing along with them and identifying the things that surprised us. And there's always at least one or two things that's like, oh, I never thought about that. None of us ever thought about that. And then we see it in the product and we realize, okay, we have to go fix something and refactor that we didn't plan for. But that's normal. That's what you expect with a new product. So I would say we typically break down the release process based upon the work. And the internationalization and the conversion into resource bundles is the first step. Those are the first things the product teams have to do, and we work closely with them because they do this work. We hold their hands, we give them the tools, we answer their questions, we support them in that process, but this is their work to do, typically. And so our schedules are collaborative with theirs. And then as they get further along, then we will start typically adding on the language deliverables. And once we get through all of our language deliverables in the product, then the next phase is typically content. So then we'll be following with help or user documentation or whatever those deliverables are from a product standpoint. Meanwhile, at the same time, we're usually working with the marketing teams and getting marketing collateral done and getting all of that information done as well. So typically, the work takes place across a few different work streams. And the biggest dependency is how quickly that engineering team that we work with can get everything internationalized and into resource bundles and then be part of our standard process. Once they're in that process, then we pick up and drop off on their schedule. So then they just kind of become one of our regular deliverables, and we're off to the races.
That's great. Yeah, the multiple work streams are very interesting, and of course, getting the resource bundles done so localization can start and all these other work streams start makes sense. After they're done with the resource bundles, I assume there is still a lot more internationalization they need to do that is not related to the resource bundles. So I assume that becomes yet another work stream for them in parallel to all the other ones.
And typically they're doing this work in parallel because they're in there working on the resource bundles. So we typically try to organize the work so they can fix most of the I-18N issues while they're in there. And so far that has worked really well, that we've not like separated them out. You do these things and then these things, because I think that it's easy once they get their translations. That's the instant gratification part of the work, right? Once they get that, to like not care as much about the remaining work. So we really hook them together. Like, you need to be doing both of these things together. And then when we start testing, we'll turn up the things that might have fallen between the lines or we didn't anticipate in unique ways that your product works or something like that. So yeah, we intentionally kind of bundle those together. It's sort of like they get their medicine while they get their dessert. You know, they get it all together, and they don't then procrastinate as much as I think they could.
Very good. And that instant gratification and seeing the translations, yeah, I've seen that work for many developers. At least they know what they're working on.
Yep. Yep.
I'm moving on to the next question. I think we've covered this with your prior responses, that you talked about the trainings that your team leads. You've also talked about Slack messaging and how you support them. Is there anything else you would like to add?
I would say that, you know, the informal Slack channels that we have are super useful. Like we have channels for people that are just ramping up and just, you know, starting to internationalize that are very specific for their products. But we also have Slack channels for certain types of developers working on certain types of common things, like maybe React front end. And then we have Slack channels that are much more focused on strange and unusual and gnarly questions that they might get. So I would definitely say that Slack has been a really lovely support and augmentation for the training and for Globalizer, in that it creates kind of a continuous community and messaging place to answer questions. And it provides a place where people can, you know, we give them all the information when they're starting out. We point them to lots of information. We have engagement meetings. We ramp them up. But I think this is just kind of a little stream of consciousness that helps support them as they go, that has been actually super useful with all of the other tools that we have. And there is no perfect developer, and there is no perfect team. So, you know, you think you've explained that, and still you will see an issue bubble up. So it's every team has a bit of their own learning cycle, I would say.
But I love how you're creating these different communities so that every developer has basically their support system, and they can help each other with people who have similar problems.
Yeah.
That's great. I will move on to the next question. So this is not just development teams that help each other, but it's also now adding the localization managers and the QA teams. So what do you do to bring them together beyond, I guess, the Slack teams that you've mentioned? The Slack teams have the developers helping each other, but also your team helps them, right?
Exactly.
Is the QA also on those Slack?
In some cases, they will be on those channels as well. It kind of just depends upon the life cycle of the product, where they're at in their process. So, you know, the main thing that we had a program that was in place when I started that I have to say has been a great program for us, which is a process that the company has that basically encourages new product development, new large feature development to go through this process. And this process basically includes all kinds of teams, including ours, and accessibility and other teams as well, that when a product team really changes their offering or their platforming, they have to reach out and engage and go through the process and make certain that they've done all the right things for their product. So that has been a super useful thing for our group. We catch big products and big rework and revision that we might not have caught otherwise. The other thing that we do within our team is we actually do engagement meetings. So when we have a new product area that is starting to work with us, we typically organize an engagement meeting with them that includes all the right folks in my team, you know, from PMO to language services to the engineering team and the globalization team that's focused on features that might be within our product itself. We pull all of our folks together in these meetings, but then we also pull all the right people together on the product side. So we get, product management, the lead engineers, QA, sometimes writers. So we will basically get the core group of folk that will be working with us involved early on, and we walk everyone through what the process is. This is who you're going to work with during these phases. These are the things we do first. This is how we engage. And so that typically gets everybody on the right page, and then makes certain that we share all the right things early on from there. And then the meetings tend to go into more one-on-one, smaller group meetings, specific tasks with engineers, and the Slack channel tends to really kick in with just occasional meetings from there until we get further along, and then we start looking at, launch dates and things like that. We also have a completely separate process that is run through our M&A organization for mergers and acquisitions. That is how we onboard new acquisitions to all of our processes. And localizations is one of the key players, and globalization, both sides of the org, are key players in this process. So it's worked out really well for us because we're part of their milestones and the things they need to do to get fully integrated in as part of the acquisition. When I started, we were not part of their process, and it's really, really hard to get their attention when they're so busy to do the right things. So if you're not in the M&A process and you have one, get in that process and try to get a front row seat if you can, so that the work that the acquisitions do prepares them to be globally enabled and globally sold quickly. And I think almost every acquisition we do now is the expectation is that's going to be a global product. So once we got into the rhythm of that process, it's been super easy for us to onboard these product teams.
So with these acquisitions, and maybe also your internal projects that you are trying to globalize, and you have many of them. At this initial stage, do you do like an internationalization assessment to see like how big of an effort there is? Or maybe to also use that to make sure everybody, part of the information to get everybody together?
We do, and this is really, we use Globalizer for this purpose. So typically what we will do early on with an acquisition is get our hands on their source code and do a good analysis, and then get with them on our findings, with the recognition that what we see through Globalizer as their I-18N effort, and then what is typical for them to convert their strings into resource bundles. Many teams have an additional layer of work on top of that goes outside, above and beyond that work in order to make their products work properly globally. So if they've got AI capabilities within their product and they're English focused, they have to think about that for language focused AI. How would that differ? What's triggering the actions, that kind of thing. So typically I would say when they look at the list that we give them from Globalizer, most of them breathe a sigh of relief, like, oh, that's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. It's like, oh, that's not going to be as hard as I thought. And then they come back a few months later, it's like, but what we're really working on that's really gnarly is this thing over here. So, but it's all part of the process. And we typically, as part of that engagement process, we ask them to demo their product, show us your product. So we get a feel for like how densely packed are their screens? How does the product itself work? What are the global opportunities within their product? If you don't look at the product, a lot of times you'll miss really obvious things.
Right.
And so that simple walkthrough of the product is a super useful thing for all the groups that are working with them to say, hey, while you're doing this, you might want to refactor how much you've got on that UI screen, because the minute that goes into German, it'll be a hot mess that no one can read, things like that, or that you wouldn't know if you hadn't seen the product itself.
Yeah, that's also, Loy, from my experience, how we've started too with other customers when we help them with assessments is first, let's do a demo. Just show us what's on your UI and how everything works before you start getting into globalizer details.
Yeah,
Great.
helps a lot.
Yeah. Well, we talked about internationalization. What about other software initiatives?
So we have a couple other ones that have been kind of interesting. I would say one of the things that we work on is a collaboration with our machine learning teams.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, we will actually do sample utterances as well as, what the machine learning might deliver to the end users. So we can get very involved in those kinds of projects, which are different. It's not a pure translation type project. It's almost more like SEO where there's one to many or many to one. The other thing that we've started doing, which is kind of interesting these days, is partnering more closely with accessibility. And in fact, the accessibility team and our team have an OKR this quarter to get many of the accessibility validation and checks into Globalizer. Because they have the same issues that we typically have in localization, in that they want engineering teams to do all the right stuff they're supposed to do. And everyone nods and smiles and says, yeah, sure, we'll do that. But the accountability about whether or not they've actually done it needs to be tooled. It needs to be checked. There needs to be some validation for that. So they're going to be joining our platform for Globalizer. That'll be a fun accomplishment, I think, by the end of this quarter.
That's awesome. In a way, wouldn't you say that making your product accessible via languages to different parts of the world is kind of an accessibility? I mean, there's a lot more to accessibility than that, but I think it makes sense that your team would be driving accessibility as well.
We're partners. We're not driving it. We are partners. But what I do hear about is a lot more synergy in this space, where globalization and accessibility are connecting a lot more. In fact, a lot of our processes are very similar. The ways that we work with our product teams have a lot of similarity. They have, our challenges are compatible. They have the fabulous wedge of compliance that we usually don't have as much, except for in some markets. But we usually, typically the localization, globalization teams may have a lot more tooling in place and or may have more resources to collaborate across the team. So it's a nice partnership.
Great. Well, so my last question here is about your development. So there is all the internationalization and localization, and then now you're also supporting these other initiatives such as accessibility or MT initiatives. Is all of this happening in Agile? I suppose it is, but
we have kind of a blend, I would say, because we have our core platform deliverable is more on a quarterly release cycle. And but all of our new acquisitions and bespoke products and much of our front-end UI is on a much more agile process. So we truly are, I would say, a blend in terms of different release cadences and even some different release methodology, depending upon the products. One thing I would say about the additional tech debt, and this is just, I would say, probably everyone has experienced this that has ever had a partner and they've tried to get them to do all of the things they need to do, but it's a struggle because it's not yet on their plan. We do have some product areas that don't move as fast. So like we're not moving as fast in right to left and by die as I would really like. We're there in some cases and we're barely there in other cases, and we're still trying to crack the nut in some cases. And one of the things that we've done as a strategy that might be useful to others is when you have a product team and they don't have your work on their radar and it's not on their roadmap for the next year plus, and it's not going to be there and they know it's not going to be there. What we've tried to do with those teams is, rather than kick it down the road even further, is I really work with them to try to get at a leadership level and alignment to at least not keep adding to the tech debt. So we typically will train their people. We typically will get them hooked into Globalizer so they know what their issues are that need to be resolved. And we work with them to try to, as they go forward, fix as they work, so that they're not incurring the big debt. They're not incurring that big tech debt that they don't really want to face right now. But what they are doing is, as they work, they chip away a little bit at it. And so the goal is to take the debt that's this big, and by the time it's on their roadmap 2 years from now, instead of it growing this big, because they're not doing anything, the goal is to just kind of shrink it down so it's a little bit more manageable. And then maybe by the time they start working on it, it starts to look like a manageable process and project that they could take on. And that really requires leadership alignment and also giving them the tools so that they can start where they are and just not make it worse and make it a little bit better. And I do think that's a good strategy for the stubborn teams that just keep procrastinating the work. It's better than not doing anything, and eventually it will lead to the right outcomes.
Yeah, makes lots of sense. I've heard the terminology of stop the bleeding.
Mm-hmm.
So you can at least stabilize the patient.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
then you will be able to operate on the rest of it. The other advantage of making the new code already not, clean is that code is more likely, because it's new, going to remain in the product, whereas legacy code or older code, some of it may get deprecated later.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, working on the new code first, we've seen works really well with other customers as well.
Yeah.
Let me see. I guess we can move to questions from the audience. Adam, you want to read those? I don't see. I don't
Sorry,
hear
muted
you.
myself.
Yes, you
Now
mute.
it's time to ask questions. Okay. Here we go. Our first question here is, how big is Loy's team now? Which roles are included?
We have a good sized team. We have a good sized team. I'll talk maybe first about the roles that we have on the team. There is a PMO organization, which is program management and operations, that includes, I would say, all of the front end engagement within our organization. So that team works with all of our stakeholders, all of the central teams that want to send us work. And it also has my product expert folk on it. So the folks that are involved in assessing what's changed in the products, looking at how we might want to test and adapt, how we test the different scripts and things like that. So that's kind of the PMO. I consider that sort of the front of the boat, or the team that shakes everybody's hand before we even begin. And then there are two engineering teams within my team. One is the localization engineering team that is working very hard on building out new platforming, because we are replatforming our existing platform that's part of our product offering to separate that out so that we have more capabilities. We also have a globalization team that is part of that. And that globalization team is also an engineering team that looks after product capabilities that are global in nature within our product. So for example, the creepy smart functionality when you're typing in your address and it's smart enough to know that that's not a real address and give you a suggestion about what is a real address. There's central teams that own that for English and for the US and for English speaking markets, but my team owns all of the global markets. So there's certain capabilities that are very much global functionality that are owned by my globalization team. And we also have internationalization as part of that as well. And then the last piece from an engineering standpoint that we have is we have, in the ERP space, it is very typical for customers to customize their own instance or their own environment of the product. So they buy our product, but then they customize around it and make it right for their business. And so we also have translation tools that our customers use to translate what they create, their own creative code on their side. And so my engineering team basically owns our tools, these tenant translation tools for our customers, and then global capabilities within the product teams and internationalization, libraries, all that fun stuff you'd expect. And then the last pillar of my team is language services. And the language services team really owns the language quality in the markets that we're focused on. So we have language managers for the tier 1 languages and language managers that manage the unstaffed or tier 2 and tier 3 languages. So it's a good sized team, and we shake a lot of hands, both at the, with engagement with new teams that want to work with us, with all the engineering teams that want to get on board to our platform, and with all of our in-market stakeholders and even customers if they want to give us feedback on terminology and things like that. So that's the group we have, and that's pretty much how they're organized.
Your team seems quite large then, because it
they're
has
a good sized team. Yeah, they're a good sized team.
Yeah, I'm tempted to add a question on that in terms of like if you could only have one person, what would be the priority? But we have other questions and we're running out of time, so I'll only come back to that.
You always need more than one, Adam. You need at least 3. You always need to cover those 3 bases, I would say.
Okay. All right. I'll leave it there. Okay. Next question. You mentioned organizing ITN work for dev teams to handle in parallel while externalizing strings. How are you assessing these ITN needs and communicating them before externalization begins? That's an educated question.
Yeah, part of what that is when we're meeting with new teams, we are explaining to them what internationalization is. I mean, there is some very fundamental conversations that often happens with those engineering teams where we're actually like, this is what we mean by, please don't concatenate and throw all these strings together on one and have us try to make sense with it. We will typically have to kind of go through that as not just the education process, but kind of walk them through the basics of what does that mean. And as they work with us, usually most engineers who are trying to take their products global, this is fun for them. This is exciting. This is interesting. They're learning a new domain. They haven't yet come to think of this as flossing, like something that they have to do that's good for them. At this point, it's still really fun. And there's usually a high degree, I would say, of passion and interest and collaboration. So we try to accomplish as much as we can while we've got passion and collaboration and interest, because once they've done the core work, it's more of a staying on top of it and maintenance activity and good hygiene, and it's less exciting. But if they build a good practice, then they usually will keep it up.
That's cool to hear you say that they're excited about it. I think many times I've talked to people who are concerned the developers won't be excited about it, but I always feel like, wow, if you could build a product that had all this application and worldwide impact, why wouldn't you? That's cool.
And they love seeing it in language. Like the first time they see it in language, it's like, look, we were part of that. Like that was possible. So I do think that is sort of the candy at the end of it. It's the little treat that's like, hey, you really did do this and it works in these markets. And then they can start selling it and demoing it. And that also makes it real when they go to trade shows and they're demoing what they're doing. Early on, the excitement is easy, I think, for new products. It's much harder to generate that with products that have been around for a while that think they've done the job, but maybe haven't done it the best that they could.
Right. I can't spend time on this, but we've seen a few customers like moving to MT right away and then retranslating, which we can facilitate that. But the whole idea is like one of the agile principles is like you've got to be able to see what you're doing. And even though they don't, you can pseudo localize for all these languages, of course, but literally seeing it in Japanese is very cool.
It's very cool. One of the things that we do in our process is we plug in our translation MT engine with our design environment with the Figma environment.
Yeah.
You know, just to get the designers to see it and go, oh, wow, I have kind of a responsibility to make this look okay for Japanese and German. You know, I have a responsibility for, you know, to think about right to left early on in the process, that kind of thing. So I do think that being able to see it is really powerful. It makes it real.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. Just, you know, further on this question, Loy, you don't have to answer this. Like other things I would think about, you know, besides externalization, are you using putting ICU to good use? That's where you would kind of handle things in parameters that are more complicated. How are you taking into account things like
what, you know, we have, this is where I would say we also have our products are at different places. So our core product offering, that is the legacy product, there are, you know, like updating libraries and things like that is something that we've spent a lot of time on this last year. But we have capabilities with our new products that you don't have, obviously, with some of your legacy products. So for us, we're coming back in and trying to catch these things up on the legacy products so they have the same capabilities. And then new products can just leap ahead, which is lovely. You know, it's like, you guys don't have any barriers. Let's see what we can do with you. And then the others, there's a little more effort involved in kind of catching up a whole platforming system. So you just, you know, you chip away at all of it as you can, and you leverage what's possible with each of the product teams, because they can be in very different places.
Okay, great. All right.
Yeah.
You know, there's also locale management at a high level. All right, so you've got some kudos from Manubo. He loves that you're representing us.
He's one of my most passionate guys.
Yeah. He's awesome.
Yeah,
all right.
really is. He really is.
Is Loy's team hiring? I won't put you on the spot for that one.
At the moment, we have a couple positions that will be out there that aren't out there right now. But yeah, I think we're kind of hunkered down right now for a little bit, but there might be a couple positions out there.
There you go.
Coming up.
All right. It's on LinkedIn. All right.
Yep.
Did leadership ever ask you to measure L10N localization ROI? If so, how did you do it? Thanks.
They always ask you to measure. They ask you to measure it, especially when you ask for money. So I would say it's really hard to ask for money without having something that you can measure. Typically, where I begin with that is getting your hands on data from the sales organization. So you should be looking at what is the possible revenue within the different markets that your products are in. So that is something your sales team knows that information. You can typically get that information. And then, so that is what's possible. That's the possible worldwide revenue that if you had product out there, you could potentially get, right? The next piece that we typically would always measure is that what is our actual revenue? Like, what is the actual revenue that we can drive and that we do drive? And those two numbers are intrinsic to any business case you ever build. And typically what I have done here, but it works differently in different companies. So you probably need to figure out your own work environment. But I would typically look at, this is the investment to, say, catch up these, in our case, we did it for our tier 1 markets. These are our tier 1 markets. This is what it's going to cost to catch up our product in these markets. This is the possible worldwide revenue in these markets once we do. And here is the planned revenue based upon the markets expecting us to come back with these products in their language, which is typically something you can get out with your sales team. They will never want to be as aggressive as you would like them to be. So it's good to push that a little bit. Like, they will always say, oh, we could do this much. It's like, yeah, no, if that was all you were going to do you think you're going to get this? Like, okay, we can do this much. It's like, now how much do you really think you can do? And so it becomes a bit of a dance and a negotiation to get at that. And typically when I've done business cases, you get at least leadership of the sales organization at a certain level to say, I'm willing to commit to this percentage of revenue across the board if you do this work. And the other thing that I think is important in that is it takes time. I mean, your channels for sales may be quite different. Is it a year? Is it 2 years? How long till you finish that product before they can demo it and sell it and it can actually, you know, they can see the revenue. So make certain that that's part of the plan. It's like, what are you expecting? Year 1 might not be much. What are you expecting? Year 2, a lot more. What are you expecting? Year 3? So it's usually easy to get your sales folks and your strategy folks to partner with you if something is not in language and they want to sell it. They will partner with you. And what you will spend to translate is so much less than they will drive in revenue. It's not even a smart conversation, and it's an obvious conversation to people who manage dollars in your company, but you do have to get them to fill in the other side of the table or you won't get anywhere.
That's awesome. A couple of anecdotes. Renato Venanato, of course, has his toilet paper principle. The companies spend more on toilet paper than they do on localization, but they don't question the toilet paper.
Yeah.
But anyway, not a pretty picture. You know, I will say a project that Mylène and I worked on like 10 years ago was really cool. It was for a customer that sold heavy equipment used in construction via auction. And they were primarily localizing for the US and maybe a little Central America, but they found once they put things in place, it's a SaaS application, so they can measure screens, they can measure things like locale selection, that they were finding 20% right away were switching languages, which was a real pleasant surprise for them.
Yeah, being able to track the data. The other thing is you don't just get the money and go run. You almost always get asked at the end of that year or 2 years to come back and say, so how did we do? And it really helps when they actually did what they said they were going to do, or at least it shows great promise. And it may mean that you tweak the next ask. But yeah, the data that follows, I think we all know it. If you can read it, if you can interact with it, if you can use something and it's in your own language, it's kind of a no-brainer. And yet, you know, in companies that are monolingual, you know, in leadership or in history, it takes time to build that awareness sometimes in the minds of all the folks that make those fun decisions. So.
Very good, very good. All right, I'm going to end it. Thank you, both of you. And thank you to all the people that stayed. Most of you stayed. We ran long, but I think this was so rich in important managerial content. The recording will go back out to you automatically. There's nothing you have to do, so don't worry about this. I'm kind of in my head putting together a little bit of a technical emphasis, but it's also a managerial webinar on the critical gate points for localization to get represented so people see it. So like Lloyd mentioned, like Figma, you know, during the design phase and like showing how that might look. During every commit and especially pull requests for developers. These are critical development points where developers are actually looking for input on what they're doing, and the use of tools like Slack and Teams to accelerate that as well and keep, it's like all the points that you talked about, it's like, wow, I want to delve into those a little bit. I might not have a guest for that. That might be a little bit more of a like bring developers in to talk about that. Even developers from Lingoport. So we'll see on that. But that's just a spark of an idea in my head. You'll get email about it. Anyway, thank you everyone. Again, if you want to reach us, adam@lingoport.com works for me. mepic with K for Mylène. I'll leave Loy's email private, but if you want to get a message to Loy, you can run it through me, and I'll do that.
You could always catch me on LinkedIn too. So
Right, right. Really pleasure, Laura. You always have a lot of eloquent points. Very good.
my
And you
pleasure
have
as
to
well.
affirm and like I do. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Take
Cheers.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. End the webinar. All right.